assuring Americans today that the attack investigation is advancing on a variety of fronts. Attorney General Ashcroft said this includes tracking how the terrorists got their money. CBS News has its own independent investigation along the terror trail. In this Eye on America report, CBS's Cheryl Atkinson tells you there is evidence of possible, mark the word because it's important, possible manipulation of the stock market just before the attacks.
Sources tell CBS News that the afternoon before the attack, alarm bells were sounding over unusual trading in the U.S. stock options market. An extraordinary number of trades betting that American Airlines stock price would fall. The trades are called puts, and they involved at least 450,000 shares of American. But what raised the red flag is more than 80% of the orders were puts, far outnumbering call options, those betting the stock would rise. Sources say they've never seen that kind of imbalance before. Normally, the numbers are fairly even. After the terrorist attacks, American Airlines stock price obviously did fall. And according to our sources, that translated into well over $5 million total profit for the person or persons who bet the stock would fall. Sources tell 60 Minutes that the initial options were bought through at least 2 brokerage firms, including NFS, a subsidiary of Fidelity, and TD Waterhouse, a discount firm. At least one Wall Street firm reported suspicions about this activity to the Securities and Exchange Commission shortly after the attack. The same thing happened with United Airlines on the Chicago Board Options Exchange 4 days before the attack. An extremely imbalanced number of trades betting United's stock price would fall also transformed into huge profits.
We can directly work backwards from the trade on the floor at the Chicago Board's Option Exchange. That trader is linked to a brokerage firm. That brokerage firm received the order to buy that put option from either someone within their own brokerage firm speculating or from one of their customers.
Now, U.S. investigators want to know whether Osama bin Laden was the ultimate inside trader, profiting from a tragedy he suspected of masterminding to finance his operation. Authorities are also investigating possibly suspicious trading in Germany, Switzerland, Italy, and Japan. The stock trail could stop at the water's edge if the money came from banks and places that don't cooperate with the U.S. But insider trading is always motivated by greed. And a senior Wall Street executive noted it would be ironic if the terrorist greed ended up providing one of the best leads investigators have.
And stock regulators broadened their investigation of whether bin Laden associates invested heavily just before the attack so they would profit when stock in United and American Airlines fell.
Federal officials have begun a major investigation into whether someone or many people benefited financially from the evil done to the country last Tuesday. Not long before the attacks occurred, there were some financial transactions in the stock market that may indicate knowledge of the attack before it began. ABC's Antonio Mora is here. Whether they ever get to, if they ever get to the bottom of it, it will be astonishing.
Astonishing, no question, Peter. What many Wall Street analysts believe is that the terrorists made bets that a number of stocks would see their prices fall. They did so by buying what are called puts. If you bet right, the rewards can be huge. The risks are also huge, unless, of course, you know something bad is going to happen to the company you're betting against.
This could very well be insider trading at the worst, most horrific, most evil use you've ever seen in your entire life.
One example, United Airlines. The Thursday before the attack, more than 2,000 contracts betting that the stock would go down were purchased. 90 times more in one day than in 3 weeks. When the markets reopened, United stock dropped. The price of the contracts soared, and someone may have made a lot of money fast.
$180,000 turns into $2.4 million when that plane hits the World Trade Center.
It's almost the same story with American Airlines.
That's a 5-fold increase in the value of what was a $337,000 trade on Monday.
All of a sudden becomes what?
$1.8 million.
And there's much more, including an extraordinarily high number of bets against Morgan Stanley and Marsh & McLennan, 2 of the World Trade Center's biggest tenants.
Could this be a coincidence? This would be one of the most extraordinary coincidences in the history of mankind if it was a coincidence.
It is absolutely unprecedented to see cases of insider trading covering the entire world, from Japan to the United States and North America to Europe.
ABC News has now learned that the Chicago Board of Options Exchange launched their investigation into the unusual trading last week. That may have given them enough time to stop anyone from profiting from death here in the U.S. It may also give investigators, Peter, a hot trail that might lead them to the terrorists.
Thanks very much. As a reminder of the complications here, though, the Secretary of the Treasury said today of this investigation, you've got to go through 10 veils before you get to the real source.
Yep.
Thanks, Antonio.
There is growing evidence tonight, no conclusive proof but growing evidence, that people with advanced knowledge of the September 11th terror attacks may have used that knowledge to make big profits on the stock market. The investigation now includes the stocks of airlines and brokerages, some of whom had offices in the World Trade Center. CBS News has new information about the hunt for suspected terror leader Osama bin Laden. And President Bush is set to formally announce new air travel security measures, including more sky marshals and stronger cockpit doors. We begin with the widening investigation of unusual stock trading possibly linked to the terror attacks. CBS News correspondent Cheryl Atkinson is following the terrorist money trail.
Sources say U.S. investigators are making headway in tracking down suspicious stock trades made just before the attacks. Overseas, some investigators have already concluded that the terrorists or their supporters who knew what was coming executed sophisticated, precise financial transactions to profit from the fallout.
It's a horrific notion to conceive of, but it is not at all out of the question. It sounds like something we'd read in a Ludlum novel, and unfortunately, I think it may well have taken place.
In the U.S., the probe has widened to include trading in Morgan Stanley Dean Witter stock, a brokerage that had 3,500 employees in the World Trade Center. Also stock in other brokerage firms which stood to suffer losses in the attack: Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs, and Bear Stearns. The airlines that had planes hijacked are also a key focus. There was extraordinary trading in stock options betting that American and United stock prices would fall, and soon. For example, United saw a surge 5 days before the attack involving 200,000 shares, people counting on the stock to plummet. Until then, the total number of such trades was for just 2,700 shares. With American, the unexplained rise came the day before the attack. U.S. authorities aren't yet saying where the trail is leading, but officials in Germany have gone public, saying they're now certain that people connected to the terrorists were involved in shady trades there. We have found movements that could not have been accidental in nature, says the head of Germany's central bank. He's talking about stock and insurance giants Munich Re and Swiss Re. Days before the attack, trading in each was double normal levels. Each company lost billions in the disaster. Altogether, at least 7 countries are dissecting suspicious trades that may have netted more than $100 million in profits. Sometimes the money trail runs cold if it leads to offshore tax havens. But investigators now believe that in this climate, even the most secretive banks will hand over information to expose the most devious kind of insider trading.
September 6th, 2001, 3,150 put options are placed on United Airlines stock. A put option is a bet that a stock will fall. That day, put options were more than 4 times its daily average. Then we have the put options that were placed on United Airlines, American Airlines, and Boeing. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, more than $2.5 million has remained unclaimed.
Although the public reacted with shock and fear when 9/11 happened, the reaction in the financial world was much different. It was business as usual, and a lot of industry insiders were actually quite pleased.
On the 5th of September, Osama bin Laden was notified that the attacks would be carried out 6 days later on the 11th. We know this because he said so himself in one of the videotape transcripts released by the Pentagon. Almost immediately, there is a spike in trades that would make money if UAL stock was to decline. UAL is the ticker symbol for United Airlines, the operator of 2 of the 4 planes hijacked in the attacks. The next day, on the 6th, demand for these bets skyrocketed to 20 times the level from 2 days prior. And 96% of the buying that day was done by a single US investment advisor. On Sunday, the 9th of September, about 2,000 newsletter subscribers received an email. It contained a trading recommendation to bet that AMR stock would decline before mid-October. AMR is American Airlines, the operator of the other two planes that would be hijacked in less than 48 hours. When markets opened on Monday the 10th, the volume of bets against the stock surged. In the early hours of the following day, America and the world were rocked by an unthinkable disaster. The New York Stock Exchange did not open that day, and remained closed for the rest of the week, the longest market shutdown since the Great Depression. When it reopened on Monday the 17th, markets collapsed. American Airlines stock plunged 40%, and United Airlines also saw nearly half its value wiped out. Bets placed on the decline were worth 10 times more in a handful of days, making some traders millions in profits. The official conclusions from the SEC and FBI investigations stated there was no evidence that anyone with advanced knowledge of the terrorist attacks traded on the basis of that information. Yet the statistical analysis says otherwise, that market activity in the days leading up to September 11 is consistent with trading on advanced knowledge of the attacks. Insurance stocks had abnormal activity too. Shares in the world's largest reinsurer, Munich Re, saw a 30% spike in volatility between the 4th and 7th of September, and put option bets against some of the World Trade Center tenants surged. 2,157 Morgan Stanley puts were bought in 3 days, compared to a daily average of 27. And 12,000 Merrill Lynch puts were bought in the 4 days prior, compared to a 252 daily average. But by far the most compelling anomalies occurred in the airlines. The surge in put option contracts for United Airlines on the 6th, and for American Airlines on the 10th. What's really weird about this is that the other airlines didn't see the same activity. Only the two airlines that just so happened to be hijacked. The handful of people who loaded up on these bets in extremely suspicious amounts. First, the United Airlines spike. 96% of the put options bought that day were traced to one entity, an American investment advisor who manages $5.3 billion across several hedge funds. The firm's name was redacted. In interviews with the CEO and the trader who executed the trade, they claimed the bet was made because of a bearish view of the airline industry. They were following the percentage of flights departing on time and concluded that fewer people had been flying. The advisor also bought 115,000 shares of American Airlines on September 10, believing the stock decline was over. Still, it's possible the puts were bought for one client who knew about the attacks and the AMR stock for another client who didn't. But the CEO insisted that no clients made the decision to buy the puts. And after looking at all of their trades, the SEC concluded that they had nothing to do with the attacks or Al-Qaeda. As for the spike in American Airlines puts on the 10th, the SEC traced most of the activity to Steve Sarnoff, the editor of the Options Hotline newsletter. He's the one who distributed an AMR put option recommendation to about 2,000 email subscribers on the 9th. Specifically, he recommended the $30 strike price puts, with an expiry on the 3rd Friday of October, the 19th. And of the 2,282 puts bought the next day, 67% of them were exactly those $30 October puts. Sarnoff was interviewed about why he made that specific recommendation, but the explanation is redacted under the invasion of personal privacy rule. Even the other smaller trades all had innocent explanations according to the official reports. The academic analysis confirms that trades betting against United and American Airlines were consistent with having foreknowledge of the attacks. However, the federal investigations of the specific trades chalk it up to an unusual coincidence. No evidence that anyone profited from advanced knowledge of the tragedy.
Jim Rickards, welcome back to the Kaiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
All right, let me read you a quote from your book. Quote, "It was the most blatant case of insider trading I have ever seen." This is a quote from the first chapter of your book. Tell us about it.
Well, the insider trading referred to in Chapter 1 of The Death of Money, Max, has to do with shorting airline stocks in advance of 9/11. So there was insider trading ahead of the 9/11 attack. It was very blatant, very clear. It was not picked up at the time. It was by some people in the market, I should say, but not by the intelligence authorities or any national security officials, but it was seen in the market. There's a lot of academic evidence, there's forensic evidence, there's anecdotal evidence, but the case is overwhelming that there was insider trading ahead of 9/11.
All right, you mentioned this CIA headquarters and the fact that there was talk about insider trading ahead of 9/11 in the days leading up to the events of 9/11, particularly 4 days leading up to 9/11. Looking at the forensic evidence and looking at markets as a way to aggregate lots and lots of data. And you talk about this in your book, the way that your team presents to the CIA a way of what you call market intelligence, or MarkEnt, which is to use this very sensitive options market as a way to give a telltale sign of activity that's happening around the world and whether potentially this would flag a terrorist attack. So in the days leading up to the 9/11, in the options market, in those airline options, you have concluded without any equivocation that there was insider trading on those options leading up to the event, correct?
Well, that's my conclusion, Max, but it's not just my conclusion. As I mentioned, there are 3 major academic studies as well as other anecdotal evidence all pointing in the same direction. So to me, it's an open and shut case. There was massive buying of put options. And of course, when you buy a put option, that's a bet that the stock is going to go down. Massive buying of put options on American Airlines and United Airlines in the last several trading days ahead of 9/11. And again, that's been studied extensively. So I don't think there's any question that it was insider trading.
We know from statements from Deutsche Bank here in Europe that these trades were done at Alex Brown, which is a firm not too far from the CIA, who was run by Buzzy Krongard. When I was working at Alex Brown, he was leading up the firm. He then took a job as the deputy director of the CIA under George Tenet during the events of 9/11. So here you have a firm in Baltimore where the trades were done that was run by the guy who's now the deputy director at the CIA. Your thoughts, your comments?
Well, Buzzy Krongard, former Alex Brown executive, was executive director of the CIA at the time. I haven't looked at all at the Alex Brown trading. To me, it's sort of irrelevant. What I look at is the market as a whole. What we were saying was really coming through the specialists. Now, you're exactly right, Max. I make the point in the book, nobody trades alone. If you're trading with somebody. So what I really focused on is the overall market action, not any particular firm, but could you tell from the price action and the volume and the momentum itself that something was going on at the time? And of course, we reached the conclusion that something was going on, which was obviously this 9/11 attack was about to happen. But I focus a lot on what's called signal amplification. And just to explain that for the viewers, you can have a very small terrorist trade, meaning, a few thousand shares. Well, someone sees that. It doesn't make the person who sees it a terrorist. They're just a specialist or a hedge fund or someone, is kind of watching the tape, and they say, you know what, there's no reason for the stock to be going down. There's no reason for anyone to be buying puts. Someone knows something I don't, and they'll buy more puts. That then puts more pressure on the stock. There's more put buying. So by the end of the day, you may have millions of shares that have traded. It doesn't mean all those people are terrorists or insiders. That's actually legitimate trading. If you're watching the tape and you do what I call a piggyback trade on the original trade, that's actually not illegal, and all those people are not terrorists. Only the original trade, my example, a couple thousand shares would have been the terror trade. The rest of it is piggybacking or signal amplification. But this is where the 9/11 Commission fell down, because when they went back to investigate after the fact, they looked at the big guys. The big guys are invariably not the insider traders. They're not the terrorists. They're the guys piggybacking. You got to go all the way down to that small initial trade to find it, and that's what we did on a multi-year strategic study for the CIA. We basically explained how you could use that forensic technique, that market information, possibly to detect the next spectacular terrorist
attack. You talk about signal amplification. When I was talking to Cantor Fitzgerald brokers and bankers in the days leading up to 9/11, they themselves were buying these airline puts. They told me, based on rumors that were coming out of Alex Brown, associated with Buzzy Krongard. This looks to me as if CIA insiders knew enough about what was going on, but chose to make money rather than blowing the whistle.
Now, the SEC promised, we will give you the name of every person who knew it was going to happen and made money on it. Well, they didn't. The SEC did say, we can't give you, now this is how they backed out of it. They said, put options are not really insider trading. Of course they are. I'm quoting them. Not really insider trading, but are merely foreknowledge of events. Well, what the hell is foreknowledge of events? That's what you use for insider trading. So the SEC said that, okay? That's what it is. And so they said, okay, we're not giving you the names, but we will tell you this. All the put options came from Israel.
On September 12, 2001, before the dust had even settled on Ground Zero, the Securities and Exchange Commission opened an investigation into a chilling proposition: that an unknown group of traders with advanced knowledge of the 9/11 plot had made millions betting against the companies involved in the attacks. Although the put options on American and United Airlines are usually cited in reference to the 9/11 insider trading, these trades only represent a fraction of the suspicious trades leading up to the attack. Between August 20th and September 10th, abnormally large spikes in put option activity appeared in trades involving dozens of different companies whose stocks plunged after the attack, including Boeing, Merrill Lynch, JP Morgan, Citigroup, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, Munich Re, and the AXA Group. Traders weren't just betting against the companies whose stocks dove after 9/11, however. There was also a six-fold increase in call options on the stock of defense contractor Raytheon on the day before 9/11. The options allowed the traders to buy Raytheon stock at $25. Within a week of the attack, as the American military began deploying the Raytheon-supplied Tomahawk missiles they would eventually use in the invasion of Afghanistan, the company's share price had shot up 37% to over $34. The SEC weren't the only ones interested in this particular 9/11 money trail either. Investigations into potential insider trading before the attacks were opened by authorities around the globe, from Belgium to France to Germany to Switzerland to Japan. It wasn't long before this global financial manhunt started yielding clues on the trail of the terror traders. On September 17th, Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Martino, addressing Italian Consob's own investigation into potential 9/11 trading, said, "I think there are terrorist states and organizations behind speculation on the international markets." By September 24th, the Belgian finance minister was confident enough to publicly announce Belgium's strong suspicions that British markets may have been used for transactions. The president of Germany's central bank was the most adamant. "What we found makes us sure that people connected to the terrorists must have been trying to profit from this tragedy." These foreign leaders were not alone in their conviction that insider trading had taken place. University of Chicago finance professor George Constantinides, Columbia University law professor John Coffey, Duke University law professor James Cox, and other academics, as well as well-known options traders like John Najarian, all expressed their belief that investors had traded on advanced knowledge of the attacks. The scale of the SEC investigation was unprecedented, examining over 9.5 million securities transactions, including stocks and options in 103 different companies trading in 7 markets, 32 exchange-traded funds, and stock indices. The probe drew on the assistance of the legal and compliance staff of the 20 largest trading firms and the regulatory authorities in 10 foreign governments. The Commission coordinated its investigation with the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the Department of the Treasury. The results of this investigation? We have not developed any evidence suggesting that those who had advanced knowledge of the September 11th attacks traded on the basis of that information. Although this sounds like the investigation did not find evidence of insider trading, a second look reveals the trick. They are not saying that there was no insider trading, only that there is no evidence that those who had advanced knowledge of the September 11th attacks participated in such trading. But this begs the question, who had that advanced knowledge, and how did the SEC determine this? The 9/11 Commission report begs the question even more blatantly in their treatment of the anomalous put option activity on United Airlines stock on September 6th. 95% of the puts were placed by a single US-based institutional investor with no conceivable ties to Al-Qaeda. Again, it is taken as a foregone conclusion that a lack of ties to Al-Qaeda means there could not have been advanced knowledge of the attack, even if the evidence shows that insider trading took place. To be sure, Insider trading almost certainly did take place in the weeks before 9/11. Although some have used the Commission report to conclude that the story was debunked, the intervening years have seen the release of not one, not two, but 3 separate scientific papers concluding with high probability that the anomalous trading was the result of advanced knowledge. In Unusual Option Market Activity in the Terrorist Attacks of September 11, 2001, University of Chicago professor Alan Podeshman concluded, examination of the option trading leading up to September 11th reveals that there was an unusually high level of put buying. This finding is consistent with informed investors having traded options in advance of the attacks. In Detecting Abnormal Trading Activities in Option Markets, researchers at the University of Zurich used econometric methods to confirm unusual put option activity on the stocks of key airlines, banks, and reinsurers in the weeks prior to 9/11. And in Was There Abnormal Trading in the S&P 500 Index Options prior to the September 11th attacks, a team of researchers concluded that abnormal activity in the S&P Index Options market around the time of the attack is consistent with insiders anticipating the 9/11 attacks. The only question, then, is who was profiting from these trades, and why was no one ever indicted for their participation in them? One lead is pursued by researcher and author Kevin Ryan. In Evidence for Informed Trading on the Attacks of September 11th, he examines an FBI briefing document from 2003 that was declassified in 2009. It describes the results of FBI investigations into 2 of the pre-9/11 trades that the Bureau had identified as suspicious, including the purchase of 56,000 shares of Stratisec in the days prior to 9/11. Stratisec provided security systems to airports, including, ironically, Dulles Airport, as well as the World Trade Center and United Airlines, and saw its share price almost double when the markets reopened on September 17, 2001. The trades traced back to a couple whose names are redacted from the memo, but are easily identifiable from the unredacted information. Mr. and Mrs. Wirt D. Walker III, a distant relative of the Bush family and business partner of Marvin Bush, the president's brother. The document notes that the pair were never even interviewed as part of the investigation because it had revealed no ties to terrorism or other negative information. In addition to begging the question, this characterization is provably false, as Ryan noted in a conversation with financial journalist Lars Schall.
Wirt Dexter Walker at Stratisec hired several people from a company called the Carlyle Group. And the Carlyle Group had bin Laden family members as investors. Also, Wirt Walker's fellow director, James Abrahamson, was a close business associate of a man named Mansour Ijaz, a Pakistani businessman. And Mansour Ijaz claimed to be able to contact Osama bin Laden on multiple occasions. So there does seem to be some circumstantial evidence indicating that these people were connected to Al-Qaeda, at least to the point where we should investigate.
And isn't it true that also some members of the bin Laden family were actually in Washington at a gathering of the Carlyle Group on 9/11?
That's true. The Carlyle Group had a meeting at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Washington on September 11th, and present there were former President George H.W. Bush, James Baker, and the brother of Osama bin Laden. I believe his name was Salem. I can't recall his exact name. But they were there, investors from the bin Laden family, meeting with Carlyle Group representatives in Washington on September 11th.
Was this why the FBI thought better of questioning Walker over his highly profitable purchase of Stratisec shares right before 9/11? The CIA figures prominently in another line of investigation. One suspicious United Airlines put option purchase that was investigated by the FBI involved a 2,500 contract order for puts in the days before 9/11. Instead of processing the purchase through United Airlines Home Exchange, the Chicago Board of Options Exchange, the order was split into 500 contract chunks and run through 5 different options exchanges simultaneously. The unusual order was brokered by Deutsche Bank Alex Brown, a firm that until 1998 was chaired by A.B. Buzzy Krongard, a former consultant to CIA Director James Woolsey, who at the time of 9/11 was himself the executive director of the CIA.
So right after the attacks of 9/11, the name Buzzy Krongard surfaced, and it was instant research that revealed that Buzzy Krongard had been allegedly recruited by CIA Director George Tenet to become the executive director at CIA, which is the #3 position right before the attacks. And Alex Brown was one of the then a subsidiary of Deutsche Bank, was one of the primary instruments or vehicles that handled all of these criminal trades by people who obviously knew that the attacks were going to take place where, how, and involving specific airlines.
Perhaps the most frank admission of insider trading is notable for three things. It was recorded on video, it has never been investigated by any agency or law enforcement official, and it was made by former CIA agent and frequent foreign policy commentator Robert Baer, the real-life inspiration for the character portrayed by George Clooney in Syriana. Talking to citizen journalists after a speaking event in Los Angeles in 2008, Baer was recorded on video making a startling assertion about 9/11 insider trading.
And then the last thing I would leave you with is National Reconnaissance Office was running a drill, a plane crashed into their building, and you know they're staffed by DOD and CIA.
I know the guy that went into his broker in San Diego and said, cash me out, it's going down tomorrow.
Really?
Yeah.
That tells us something.
What?
That tells us something.
Well, his brother worked in the White House.
This truly remarkable statement bears further scrutiny. If Baer is to be believed, a former CIA agent has first-hand knowledge that a White House insider had foreknowledge of the attacks, and to this day not only has Baer never revealed the identity of this person, but no one has questioned him about his statement or even attempted to pursue this lead. So how is it possible that the SEC overlooked, ignored, or simply chose not to pursue such leads in their investigation? The only possible answer, of course, is that the investigation was deliberately steered away from such persons of interest and any connections that would lead back to foreknowledge by government agencies, federal agents, or their associates in the business world. Unfortunately, we will likely never see documentary evidence of that from the Commission itself. One researcher requesting access under the Freedom of Information Act to the documentary evidence that the 9/11 Commission used to conclude that there had been no insider trading received a response that stated that the potentially responsive records have been destroyed. Instead, we are left with sources that refuse to be identified saying that CBOE records of pre-9/11 options trading have been destroyed, and second-hand accounts of traders who had heard talk of an event in advance of 9/11. In a roundabout way, perhaps the 9/11 Commission reveals more than it lets on when it tries to dismiss key insider trades with the pithy observation that the traders had no conceivable ties to Al-Qaeda. If those with foreknowledge of the attacks weren't connected to Al-Qaeda, what does that say about the identity of the real 9/11 perpetrators?
There are major concerns this morning about possible insider trading around the war with Iran. Now, here's what happened. On Monday, President Trump postponed an ultimatum regarding the Strait of Hormuz. Now, that news sent oil prices plunging and U.S. stocks soaring. But just minutes before that announcement, there was an unusually large surge in oil and stock trades, about $580 million worth. So some people made a lot of money. A White House spokesperson told the Financial Times it does not tolerate any administration official illegally profiting off of insider knowledge, and it's not yet clear if an investigation is underway. CBS News business analyst Jill Schlesinger is here to help us unpack this. So explain what happened to the market before and after the president's announcement on postponing the attacks on Iran's power plants.
On Monday morning at around 6:59, we saw a big surge in activity in the pre-markets. And these are just bets on what's going to happen next. So if you look at this chart, 649 to 701, this big, huge spike of a lot of traders making a bet that crude oil would drop and stocks would go up. And then 15 minutes later, the announcement comes out that there are talks going on between the U.S. and Iran, and then it exactly plays out as these traders had hoped. Crude oil drops by 10%, stocks go up dramatically, and someone made a lot of money. The timing of this is very suspicious.
It's a little suspicious. You think it's a coinky-dink?
Well, I think we would like
also known as coincidence.
Yes, exactly. I would like to say that normal times, if you saw a surge in this kind of activity, it would immediately spark some concern that there was insider trading. Now, you probably remember the last time we were really talking about insider trading was with Martha Stewart 25 years ago.
Yes.
And she was accused of making trades ahead of the market and making money from that. Well, that's illegal. So normally you'd have a regulator, in this case, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, or in stock case, the SEC. And right now, I don't hear any word that the regulators are opening an investigation to try to clamp down on this. Part of the reason is that these regulators have been told the tone at the top is, hey, lighten up on your regulation. That's not important under the Trump administration. And the second problem is they have been gutted. They've lost a lot of funding. So I'd love to see an investigation to see what really happened here.
We turn now to a mystery in the oil markets and the suspicion that some people are getting very rich by trading on inside information. In the minutes before President Trump's announcement Monday that the U.S. would postpone strikes against Iranian energy targets, traders suddenly bet hundreds of millions of dollars on oil prices falling, which is exactly what they did. To help us understand, Jill Schlesinger is here, CBS News business analyst. Jill, why does this stand out and why should people care?
Well, I think the most important thing and what stands out is that we saw a surge of trading activity. So if you look at this at 649 to 651, there's this circle there.
Yeah.
That's a big jump up in activity. And then soon after, we see the price of oil at the top, and then it drops by 10%, literally in minutes. 15 minutes before this non-public information is out.
So somebody might have known something a little too early.
It does appear that way. And why we care about this is that is not considered public information, and someone seems to know it. And that's illegal, Tony. I mean, that's the issue, is that this is essentially insider trading.
So is it policed? What do we do about it?
The thing about insider trading is we've known about it forever. We have so many different ways to do it. It's usually triggered by this kind of trading activity, and we get an investigation. But right now, I don't think we're going to get a big investigation. The Trump administration says light on regulation, and there's not a lot of funding for folks at any of these regulatory bodies. So I think for the people at home, it kind of feels like it's not a level playing field because this looks like it is not.
Well, as the war rages on, there are new reports now suggesting insider trading on oil. The Financial Times is reporting that traders placed $580 million worth of oil bets just ahead of President Trump's social media post Monday morning on Iran talks. The paper says that the bets came about 15 minutes before the president's post touting productive talks and postponing strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for 5 days. Our Elizabeth Schulze joins us now with more. Wow. So what exactly do we know about what's going on here?
Yeah, not surprisingly here, Kira, this is raising a lot of eyebrows on Wall Street and also among some lawmakers here in Washington. The question is, was there information that traders who placed those big bets had that allowed them to get that information early and make huge profits? So let's walk back how this happened. The president's post came just after 7 a.m. He touted that progress, saying that there had been constructive conversations toward ending the war. That would be a good thing for the markets. That would mean oil prices would go down and stocks would go up. And that is exactly what happened after the president made that post. Well, exactly 15 minutes before that, what we saw was this huge spike in volume. And you can see it right there in that chart on your screen, 6:49 a.m., a spike in volume trading for oil futures, both WTI crude oil and Brent. So what that shows is a lot of people at that time were placing these bets. And according to the Financial Times, those bets were worth $580 million. If you've been buying oil if you've been selling oil and then oil went down, that would have been a pretty good trade, Kira. Likewise, if you've been buying stocks and they surged and you've done that in advance, that would have been a pretty good trade. So we immediately did hear some backlash to this. We saw Democratic Senator Chris Murphy immediately question if this could have been insider trading. He even did write on X there. You can see who was it? Was it President Trump? Was it a family member, a White House staffer? The White House, in a statement, did say that the White House does not tolerate any administration official illegally profiteering off of insider knowledge. We also reached out to the agencies that would typically regulate this kind of activity, the SEC, the CFTC. They declined to comment on this, Kira.
We're also just learning tonight that the Justice Department here at home is investigating a series of oil market trades that happened right before some big moves related to the war. We're talking like big policy announcements, even some online posts by President Trump, according to a source familiar with the investigation. So now 2 government agencies are looking into at least 4 trades where people made more than $2.5 billion. They bet that oil prices would sink right before that actually happened. These trades were from March and April. Right now, this source tells our team there's no conclusive evidence of wrongdoing. Ali Canal is joining us now. Ali, this is so it's the predictive market story, as it relates to geopolitics again. What kind of stuff were these people betting on?
Well, like you said, Hallie, they're all tied to this ongoing war with Iran. But let's get a little bit specific here. When it comes to those bets, they came before President Trump said he would delay attacks on Iran's power grids. They came before talks of a ceasefire between the 2 countries and before updates surrounding that Strait of Hormuz, which is that key global shipping route for oil that's been at a near standstill since this war began. And honestly, where a lot of the tension has been regarding this war. The source also went on to say that the Justice Department and the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, aka the CFTC, that's that government agency that not only regulates oil market futures, but also prediction markets. So like you were saying, Hallie, a bit of that through line here. They're both looking into those 4 trades. Combined $2.6 billion plus were made on these bets that oil would fall, and they did. So again, our source wants to say that we're still very early on in the investigation here. There currently is no wrongdoing at this point, but these trades were suspicious enough to warrant a lot of these investigations.
We are seeing those historic swings in the price of oil with every headline about the Iran war. And now we have learned that the Justice Department is investigating a series of suspiciously timed trades just ahead of major announcements about the war by President Trump. Sources tell ABC News that the DOJ, along with the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, are probing at least 4 trades in the oil market where traders made a total of more than $2.6 billion betting that oil prices would drop right before they actually did. Starting on March 23rd, data from the London Stock Exchange showed just 15 minutes before Trump posted that he would delay attacking Iran's power grid, traders bet $500 million that oil prices would fall. On April 7th, a few hours before Trump announced a ceasefire, nearly $1 billion in bets on oil dropping. Similar pattern on April 17th, $760 million in trades just 20 minutes before Iran announced the Strait of Hormuz was open. And on April 21st, 15 minutes before Trump extended the ceasefire, traders bet $430 million oil would go down. We do not know the identities of these traders, but these are very big payouts, raising concerns about insider trading. The CFTC and DOJ are not officially commenting, guys.
It shouldn't be too hard to figure out who made the trades, and that is definitely suspicious.
I want to get more on Secretary Hegseth now from Elizabeth Schultze. Elizabeth, we reported yesterday this report that Secretary Hegseth may have tried to invest in defense stocks before the war began. Investigations of that now.
Yeah, good morning, George. Democratic lawmakers are now launching an investigation after that explosive report from the Financial Times. It claimed a broker for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth tried to make a multi-million-dollar investment into a fund with defense stocks weeks before the Iran war. So top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee writing in a letter to Hegseth, attempting to profit from a war you helped engineer using insider information is shocking and outrageous. A spokesman for Hegseth says the article is entirely false and fabricated and is demanding a retraction from the paper. The House committee also sent letters to BlackRock and Morgan Stanley seeking more information. Both companies declined to comment. The SEC, which would typically investigate insider trading, also not commenting here. So Hegseth's latest financial disclosures show no major investment in defense stocks. He did sell shares of big companies, including Walmart, Apple, and Costco, about 1 week before President Trump announced his sweeping tariffs last year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Americans are paying a high price for Donald Trump's war with Iran. We've got 14 service members who are dead, over 400 more who are wounded. Prices are rising for nearly every American family. But someone is profiting off Trump's war. Insiders who know what's going on and who place bets on that inside information. On March 23rd, just 14 minutes before Trump unexpectedly posted about, quote, very good conversations on ending the war, traders suddenly bet $500 million on the price of oil, which, once Trump made his announcement, immediately dropped. It happened again on April 7th, and then again on April 21st, a surge in oil bets, then a Trump post, and then a huge shift in oil prices in just the space of minutes. It looks like insiders have been making out like bandits using secret information about the war. Now, one U.S. soldier has been charged, but that was for betting on capturing Maduro months ago. Not a single person has been charged in the many trades over the Middle East war. So, Secretary Hegseth, do you have any explanation for these perfectly timed spikes in trading activity other than insider trading?
Senator, all I can tell you is that everything we've done in our department, everything we've done with information, in working with the White House and across the interagency has been completely above board.
Well, so what does it mean? Do you have any other explanation other than insider trading? Do you have a story for why just minutes before there's an announcement, there's a surge in trading activity?
Senator, I'm more than focused on doing my job and ensuring we execute properly, which thankfully, under this administration, our troops have done incredible things in all these missions. My job in all of those moments is to make sure we're prepared. And that's part of the reason why we've been so successful in these raids, in these efforts, is that this joint force is prepared.
You're saying you're not paying any attention to this insider trading. Is that what you're telling me? That you've paid no attention to this? You haven't noticed it? You haven't done anything about it?
What I'm saying is we're focused on our mission of executing for the American people, and what happens in markets is not, in betting markets is not something we're involved in.
What happens in betting markets doesn't matter to you, even if the information may be coming from insiders in your office?
Senator, it's not something we're involved in at all. And of course, we take operational security at every level very seriously. In fact, no one's taken operational security more seriously than us. If you look at what it required to keep secret Midnight Hammer and Operation Maduro, the absolute resolve with Maduro, and the steps we've taken, so no one's been tighter about ensuring that operational security is ensured.
To deal with insider trading out of your office?
I mean, we would ensure at every level that inside information
is take that as a no.
Properly safeguarded.
All right. Well, obviously you're not. I'm also concerned about recent reporting on your own financial dealings with regard to profiting from the war in Iran. The Financial Times reported that your broker tried to buy hundreds of shares in a BlackRock fund invested in defense companies just before the war began. The law clearly prohibits the Secretary of
That entire story is false, has been from the beginning, and was made up out of whole cloth. And anybody that looks at it sees how it was worded from the beginning to make it look like I was involved in something I had nothing to do and never have. So any insinuation that I've ever profited, other than serving this nation, what I give, what you give, what others give, I'm not looking for money. I don't do it for money. I don't do it for profit. I don't do it for stocks. And that's part of the reason why I'm able to be effective in this job, because no one owns me. No one owns this department. No one owns this president. And we can execute for the American people, and we do.
The law clearly prohibits the Secretary of Defense from owning stock in the 10 biggest defense contractors. Other senators and I sent you a letter with detailed questions about this, and you have not given us a response. So I'd like to hear you say, did you, through your broker at Morgan Stanley or otherwise, seek to invest in any defense-related funds right before Trump started the Iran war?
I'll give it to you as a big, fat negative.
Then let me ask you a second question. Is your broker getting your personal sign-off on any investment in individual stocks?
Bigger, fatter, negative.
He's not getting your sign-off before he makes investments in defense stocks? Can I refer you to your
I'm not making investments,
agreement?
Senator.
I am asking, does he know that he has to get your sign-off before he does that?
Of course. I don't know what you're looking for, but you ain't going to find it.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
We have been paying very close attention to questions of possible insider trading amid the Iran war. And if you think we don't cover it, I invite you to watch more often. In fact, questions we have been asking since Liberation Day are all around this when it comes to trading activity. Now, finally, regulators appear to be paying attention, too. Bloomberg reports that the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, is now investigating at least 2 instances where a surge in suspiciously well-timed trades occurred just minutes before our president changed his public position on the war. That is according to people familiar with the matter. There has been a growing concern over multiple instances of spiked oil trades shortly before major policy announcements. Bloomberg notes that the CFTC and Intercontinental Exchange declined to comment on the investigation, and a White House spokesperson referred the comment to the CFTC. For more, I want to bring in Josh Rogan, lead global security analyst with WP Intelligence. Ron and Dan still here. Josh, I'm so glad you are joining us. You have been following this issue closely. What have you found?
Right. Well, for months there have been suspicions that insiders have been leaking inside information about Trump's announcements in the war to trade on prediction markets like Polymarket and Kalshi to the tune of millions of dollars. And now what we've seen is an escalation of that strategy where insiders seem to be trading on futures markets and options markets to the tune of billions of dollars. And what's crazy about that is that in the April 17th, $760 million worth of oil futures were traded within a 2-minute span, exactly 20 minutes before a major announcement came in the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, which wasn't even a real opening, but that's besides the point. And in that corruption lies a bunch of crimes that the CTFC and the SEC and the DOJ could spend years trying to investigate. But the bottom line is that the corruption is endemic, it's systemic, and it's growing. And it's not only affecting those markets, it's affecting the entire oil markets and the entire stock market, because the scale of these illicit trades and suspected insider trading has gotten so large that no one's ever seen anything like it.
In a statement, the CME Group defended itself, and they went on to say the following. Any review of market behavior must include all venues, including prediction markets like Polymarket and Kalshi. And we should note the current CFTC said is a Trump appointee who has publicly sided with the prediction markets. Don Jr. is an investor/advisor to both Kalshi and Polymarket. Josh, what is your expectation from this investigation? Because it blows my mind that the CME basically says it's not just me, it's those guys too. Almost you can't point at me for underage drinking at this party. Look in the backyard. We've all been partying all night.
Right, but just because the crimes are rampant doesn't mean that they're not crimes, first of all. And the second thing is that, you know, the context that you laid out is exactly right. We have an administration that's gutted public accountability, and, you know, the SEC main enforcement prosecutor resigned in protest because they weren't allowed to investigate cases related to the Trump organization and Trump associates. And the public integrity unit of the DOJ has been slashed from 36 lawyers to 2. Okay, under Trump. So the CTFC can announce an investigation, but there's just not a lot of confidence out there in Wall Street or in Congress, for that matter, that they're going to get to the bottom of this, because it's obvious that the president is not interested in this kind of accountability. And yeah, sure, you could point to Polymarket and Kalshi, but again, those are millions of dollars, and the futures trading corruption is billions of dollars. So it's an order of magnitude worse, but they're both corruptions, and you know, in a sense, they both need to be investigated. And it just seems like our oversight and accountability mechanisms in their current state are not up to the task. But I mean, fingers crossed, I guess.
Yeah, and I would also argue, yes, this is the worst we've ever seen. But make no mistake, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, on every possible committee you could think of, not all of them, but all sorts of them, trade on an insane amount of inside information. And the worst part about it, it's freaking legal. What's your take on this?
So this is very interesting. This is a violation.
Yeah,
it's
it's
called
interesting.
The Eddie Murphy rule. This has come from the movie Trading Places, where Duke and Duke were.
Oh my God!
No, this is real. This is part of the Dodd-Frank Act. The Eddie Murphy.
I'm going to
rule,
play Jamie Lee Curtis. Dan's going to be Dan Aykroyd, and you can be Eddie Murphy.
Okay, fine. But you cannot trade by rule of Dodd-Frank on any inside material, non-public information that is given by the government or taken from the government and then trade in the futures market in the CFTC, which is what happened in Trading Places. There was illicit activity going on there. So this is an alleged violation of that rule, which, if investigated and enforced, would be punishable both civilly and criminally. But
If. I interviewed the heads of Kalshi and Polymarket at a live event, and it's like they were laughing in my face. They were looking at me like, okay, boomer, laughing their way to the bank. As the biggest investors on the street have given these boys and girls money, they think, you know, as long as this is, it's just like, they're like, yep, until somebody makes the rules, we're just going to run and run and run. So are they going to win this game? Because they're laughing at us.
You need enforcement. You need...
By whom?
Again,
Congress.
Well, in this administration, you would need enforcement from the Commodity Futures Trading Commission that the DOJ would support, that the Trump administration would support, and you have Kalshi, which is now worth $22 billion. It's become a rather large entity in a very short time. My guess is that absolutely nothing happens.
Okay, quick before we go then, Josh, you just said, hold on, you just said Congress. Do you have confidence that Congress is going to do anything about it? Because you're right. This corruption, potential corruption, is larger than anything we've ever seen. But before this corruption, we've been talking for years about changing the rules for members of Congress, what they could trade. And what did they do? Nothing.
Right. Well,
and
set aside...
just save Abigail Spanberger, who put together a pretty extraordinary framework of how they should change the rules. Nothing ever came to a vote, and it was protected by leadership in Congress, because what do they like to do? Trade stocks with information that only they have.
Yeah, insider stock trading by congressmen and their staffs is a horrendous problem. But the Polymarket and Kalshi problem particularly has got a lot of legislation on it right now. I would point you to Senator Warren, Senator Whitehouse, Representative Richie Torres of New York, Mike Levin. They've all got bills to advance the idea that those Wild West markets need to be reined in and have some accountability or transparency, because it's not only affecting people's pocketbooks, but also our national security. And if Iran war decisions are being made by people who have a financial interest in it going one way or the other, then the tail is wagging the dog, and that's really bad for our national security. Will that advance? Not in as long as the Republicans are in charge. But if and when Democrats take control of Congress, that's when all of these bills are going to come off the shelf, and you're going to see real movement.
While many families are struggling to fill up their gas tanks and pay for groceries, some traders and big-time investors out there are getting lucky off the war's market chaos. So lucky, in fact, that regulators are starting to take a closer look. According to the Wall Street Journal, the CFTC, or Commodity Futures Trading Commission, is now scrutinizing a flurry of suspicious oil trades made literally moments before the president postponed an attack on Iran's energy infrastructure in late March. Oh, really? They just started looking now? The trades accounted for more than $800 million worth of U.S. and international oil futures. People familiar with the matter said the CFTC is trying to gauge whether an insider with prior knowledge of Trump's change of heart traded on said information or leaked it to someone who could. The nightcap is still here. Okay, Ron.
Yes, ma'am.
What's your reaction?
There are no coincidences. You don't get a trade that close to an event that somebody doesn't know about. I've been doing this almost as long as you've been alive. And when people who actually engage in this practice...
That's how he gets invited here.
Look, it is a serious thing. There's no way in which someone did not have inside information in those trades. It's not coincidental. I've known people who have engaged in it, and in the old days, it was done in a much different way. This is as blatant an abuse as I've ever seen. And again, if it looks like, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a duck. There's no reason to say anything otherwise.
Okay, well, people that are familiar with the investigation have said that some of the firms that were approached by the regulators attributed their trading activity to just a headline that had come out a few minutes before about the White House looking to end the war. This headline came out about 15 minutes before the president's announcement. That's what they're claiming their excuse for this is. How hard is something like this to prove, A? And B, how do we know if the CFTC is really digging into and going after it? Or at the very least, are they just trying to save face because there is so much noise around this from people who say this stinks to the high heavens?
Well, to your first question, it's not that hard at all because of technology. If we were talking about a conversation where it was really trying to track down who was involved and who had their hand in what, without the aid of being able to do forensic accounting, if you will, and work backwards, that would be a very different conversation. We are not, which then turns to your second question. If the investigation is thorough enough and people are invested in doing their jobs, they will get to the right answers. That's a big if, and we all know that.
There's a concern now that members of Congress, members of the president's administration, any type of government employee could use basic insider knowledge and make huge profits on anything government related. So we want to not only launch investigations to see how widespread this has been thus far, but also to prove a case that we've got to pass some type of legislation. And I think it wouldn't be too much to ask to say members of Congress can't participate in the predictions market, nor can government employees or people in the president's administration.
Got to go further than that, though, probably.
Yeah, probably.
Doesn't it? Who's in charge?
I know, and so I can't do it, but you're my golf buddy, and I say, okay, Joe, hey, listen, I think that somebody in the Epstein investigation is going to get indicted tomorrow. I would have inside information on something like that. If I told you, if the language isn't written correctly, then I didn't break any law. You made a bunch of money, and you can take me out to eat or buy something for my business. I mean, there's so many loopholes, as you know. There are always unintended consequences when you pass legislation. So anytime you set up a regulatory framework, it's very difficult. Just like with cryptocurrency, members of Congress all agree that we need to have regulations on cryptocurrency. There's just not an agreement on how to do that.
Or
Same
with AI.
Right,
Same with
that's
AI.
what
We were talking about earlier this
Right.
morning.
So you've got cryptocurrency, AI, and the prediction market, all relatively new things where there's overwhelming agreement in Congress that there needs to be regulatory framework. There's just not agreement on how that.
So as is prediction markets, how much of it will be able to survive this scrutiny, let's say 2 years from now? What does it look like? Who's in charge? Who's regulating? Where's the oversight? Is
That's
the SEC?
I think it's going to be harder to regulate, to get agreement to regulate the predictions market, because just like with crypto and AI, everyone agrees something needs to be done. I think where we can have agreement is we can ban members of Congress and ban government employees from participating in it, and it's probably going to have to go further. You're going to have tight language where you can't even consult or give tips or anything like that.
It's the same language that exists for this SEC when it comes to publicly traded securities.
Exactly.
If you are someone who has inside information, you are bound to not trade that information or give it to anyone else and eventually benefit.
Yes, 100%. 100%.
So there's this phenomenon that people are starting to catch on to where a certain news organization predicts serially, many times in a row over the past 20 or so days, an imminent peace agreement between Iran and the United States. Now, that agreement has not materialized. Apparently, we're not actually close to getting one. But at the moment when that's announced, every single time you've seen a massive move in global energy markets and in equity markets, stock market, because people are betting that that will have direct effects on the value of stocks and or oil or other commodities. And a little bit before that announcement, every single time you have seen massive bets made on oil futures. You've seen billions of dollars change hands, and you can surmise that somebody is getting rich doing this. In fact, you can be absolutely certain. Now, you don't know who. Really, the only thing you know is A, it's happening, and B, no one will ever be held to account for it. Now, how do you know that? Because we've seen this a lot. In fact, we saw it, and no one ever wants to remember this, on 9/11. Shortly before 9/11, somebody put big bets in shorts against airline and bank stocks. Those are two businesses that were directly affected by the events of 9/11. Now, we know this happened because these are public markets, so there's a record of it, but we also know, because they admitted it, the FBI figured out who did it. But the FBI never got around to telling us their identity. So the largest federal law enforcement agency has known for 25 years who had foreknowledge of 9/11, and that's demonstrable because they bet against the events of that day before the rest of us experienced them, and has never divulged their identities. Now, we can guess as to why that is. Why would the FBI be protecting people with foreknowledge of 9/11? We don't know for certain what the answer is, but we do know that they are doing it. They did it, and they're still doing it. So if the identities of people who bet against 9/11, who shorted airline stocks before 9/11, are somehow classified on national security grounds and you're not allowed to know them, then we can bet safely that whoever is profiting from the Iran war in public markets probably isn't going to get any kind of insider trading violation. Probably not. But one thing we also have learned is that these markets are much more vulnerable, susceptible, maybe based on manipulation than we ever thought. And if you think about it, that's kind of a surprise. Even people who complained about how central the stock market is to the American economy, and you can argue whether we have a real economy, if it's based on anything, that's an academic argument. But even people who thought, wow, we seem a little bit over-invested in public equities markets, kind of assumed they were real. I mean, market's a pretty straightforward proposition. I've got something to sell. You want to buy it. I'll sell it for what you'll buy it for, and vice versa. It's transparent by its nature. It's self-correcting. That's the basis of our economic system, capitalism, free market capitalism. It always finds the right level, the rational level, because it's based on the free exchange of money for assets. But that's not what we're seeing now. Not at all. Markets are doing things you would not expect markets to do if they were behaving rationally in a free way, if they weren't rigged. You would see, well, certain commodities prices, including oil, go up a lot more than they have. Gold go up a lot more than it has. And yet gold and oil and other commodities have stayed far lower than you would rationally expect them to stay after 60 days of terrible news out of the world's center of global energy production. So the Strait of Hormuz has been closed for months now, in effect. And yet oil, as of airtime tonight, was under $100 a barrel. Much lower than it was in, say, 2008. That is bizarre. But it's more than bizarre. It's fake. It is obvious. It's become too obvious to deny over the past couple of months that public markets are not what they told us they were, which is to say open and free and equal for everyone to participate in. It's going to take a long time for that understanding to percolate down to the level of retail investors. But the knowledge is there, and you can't kind of deny it, that some people are getting rich from this and most people aren't. And it's not exactly clear the mechanisms by which they are, but it's very obvious that it's happening. We're not accusing Bill Ackman of participating in this. It's not like Bill Ackman would talk down share prices in publicly traded companies to make money. Oh, wait, he's done that his whole life. But in this specific case, we have no evidence of a crime, assuming it still is a crime. But we can say with great confidence that in this, as in every other war, some people will do just fine. In fact, they will greatly benefit from it, which is one of the reasons we keep having wars, because they are enormously profitable. It's hard for normal people to appreciate that that could possibly be true. People die, innocents die in foreign countries, your own country becomes poor, your own service members die, so you can get rich. Could anyone be that dark? Yeah. And we're watching it now.